7 years ago, my sister stole the man I was about to marry, and my parents blamed me for working too much. Tonight at their anniversary party, she stands before hundreds of guests, raising a glass to mock me as a lonely, impoverished failure. She has absolutely no idea that the man walking through those doors right now is my legal husband, and he holds every dirty secret needed to destroy her perfect life in a single heartbeat. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Faith Stewart. The air inside the sprawling Savannah, Georgia mansion was heavy with the suffocating scent of imported white roses and the quiet clinking of crystal glasses. I stepped into the grand foyer, the designated venue for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Wearing a simple yet impeccably tailored navy silk dress, it was an elegant choice, but deliberately devoid of the flashy, oversized designer logos my family so desperately craved to validate their social standing. I stood at the edge of the massive ballroom, a silent observer in a sea of superficial wealth, taking in the spectacle of the evening with cold detachment. Directly across the room, bathing in the warm, golden glow of a massive crystal chandelier, was my younger sister, Chloe. As always, she had positioned herself perfectly as the undisputed center of attention. She was draped in a blindingly bright gold-sequined gown, throwing her head back in exaggerated laughter at a joke someone had just made. Standing faithfully by her side, holding her evening clutch like a well-trained servant, was Julian. Looking at him now, I felt nothing but a dull, clinical emptiness. 4 years ago, Julian was my fiancé. We had picked out a house, discussed our future, and planned our lives, right until Chloe decided she wanted what was mine. She seduced him with effortless cruelty, stealing him away and leaving me to face the harsh blame from our parents, who stubbornly insisted I had driven him away by working too hard. As I navigated deeper into the ballroom, the familiar whispers began. I could feel the heavy collective weight of my relatives' gazes tracking my every move. Aunts, uncles, and family friends offered me tight, patronizing smiles filled with thinly veiled pity. To them, I was the tragic, abandoned older sister who had failed at love and buried her misery in a dead-end corporate job. They frequently gossiped about my modest lifestyle, my refusal to buy expensive cars, and my supposedly low-paying, mind-numbingly boring administrative role at Aegis Vanguard Solutions. They looked down on me with a sense of bizarre superiority, completely unaware that Aegis was actually the premier crisis management conglomerate on the planet. They had no idea that I was not fetching coffee or organizing filing cabinets, but rather operating as a top-tier strategist, quietly handling multi-million-dollar public relations disasters and corporate espionage scandals for some of the most powerful people in the world. It did not take long for Chloe's radar to lock onto my presence. I saw her eyes light up with a familiar, predatory gleam. She swiftly detached herself from her circle of wealthy admirers and glided across the polished marble floor toward me. A tall crystal flute of vintage champagne balanced delicately in her manicured hand. Julian trailed obediently behind her, his eyes locked firmly on the ground, entirely unwilling to meet my gaze. Chloe's voice cut sharply through the ambient classical music, her volume intentionally raised to ensure every single guest within a 50-foot radius was listening. She immediately launched into an exhaustive, unprompted monologue about her fabulously opulent life. She loudly detailed their recent 3-week excursion to the Amalfi Coast, making sure to emphasize the private oceanfront villa that cost tens of thousands of dollars a night, and flaunting the custom diamond bracelet Julian had supposedly begged her to buy in a private boutique in Paris. The surrounding guests naturally gravitated toward her loud declarations, slowly forming a tight, eager ring of spectators around us. Once she was absolutely certain she had a captive audience, Chloe shifted her strategy. Her tone morphed seamlessly, from boastful arrogance to a sickeningly sweet, fake sympathy. "Faith," she sighed, tilting her head and pouting her lips with exaggerated pity. "You came to a family celebration all by yourself again. I was really, truly hoping you would manage to bring someone this time. And did you take a cab here? I told you specifically that I could have sent one of our private drivers to pick you up. It just breaks my heart seeing you struggle so much to even afford a decent vehicle." A ripple of hushed murmurs and muffled giggles spread through the onlookers. Chloe let out a sharp, ringing laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings, making sure the humiliation landed perfectly. "I mean, just look at you," she continued, her words dripping with venom cleverly disguised as sisterly concern. "Working yourself to the bone for absolute pennies. You are just so stiff, so incredibly needy, and so utterly obsessed with your little cubicle job. It is honestly no wonder you are so unmarketable in the dating world. Truly, it makes perfect sense why absolutely no man dares to step into your boring, pathetic little life. You just repel them." "Faith," the whispering grew louder, a chorus of judgmental voices validating Chloe's cruel narrative. I looked at Julian, who shifted uncomfortably but remained completely silent, far too much of a coward to intervene. Then I looked back at my sister. I saw the triumphant, malicious smirk plastered across her perfectly contoured face. She was fully expecting me to shrink away in shame, to lower my head, or perhaps even burst into tears and flee the venue, just as I might have done years ago. She wanted a dramatic scene, a breakdown that would solidify her victory once and for all. Instead, I simply stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight. I let a calm, remarkably genuine smile spread across my face. I looked directly into her cold eyes and let the heavy silence stretch for several long seconds, allowing the tension to build until I had the absolute, undivided attention of every single person in the room. "I genuinely appreciate your deep concern for my romantic life, Chloe," I said, my voice incredibly steady, clear, and projecting effortlessly over the crowd without needing to shout. "But you are entirely mistaken. I am not single. I am actually married, and my husband is walking through those front doors right now." The heavy, custom-carved oak doors at the grand entrance of the ballroom did not just open, they were swung apart by the estate staff with a heavy, resounding thud that echoed over the soft classical music. Every head in the vicinity naturally turned toward the sudden noise. The air in the room seemed to undergo a sudden, almost physical drop in pressure. A man stepped across the threshold, and the very atmosphere of the venue shifted violently to accommodate him. He was tall, bearing a distinctly commanding posture, dressed in a flawless, midnight black bespoke suit that draped over his broad shoulders with lethal precision. There was no need for ostentatious accessories, flashing watches, or loud colors to announce his presence. His absolute power radiated from the quiet, predatory confidence in his stride, and the sharp, unyielding angles of his jawline. My sister was still standing just inches away from me. Her lips parted slightly, undoubtedly preparing to deliver whatever venomous, humiliating retort she had queued up next. But as her gaze carelessly drifted past my shoulder and landed on the imposing figure lingering at the entrance, the malicious amusement completely and utterly evaporated from her eyes. I watched her reaction unfold in exquisite, uninterrupted slow motion. The blood rapidly drained from her perfectly bronzed face, leaving behind a sickly, chalky pallor that made her look like a ghost. The muscles in her cheeks twitched uncontrollably, her meticulously practiced smile freezing into a grotesque mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her fingers, previously gripped tightly around her drink, went entirely slack. The delicate crystal flute slipped from her hand. It fell through the air in a terrifyingly silent descent before colliding violently with the polished marble floor, shattering into dozens of glittering shards. The sharp, violent crash of breaking glass pierced the sudden quiet of the ballroom, splashing expensive vintage champagne across the floor and the designer shoes of the guests standing nearby. The sound should have prompted gasps of surprise or immediate scolding from our mother. But instead, an eerie, suffocating silence violently swallowed the entire hall. The mocking whispers that had previously been aimed at me died instantly in the throats of my relatives. A collective, breathless realization swept through the crowd of over 200 elite guests. They recognized him, even in a city populated by old money and generational wealth. Harrison Vance was an entirely different breed of apex predator. He was the most notoriously ruthless venture capitalist in the technology and financial sectors, a man who controlled investment portfolios worth tens of billions of dollars and who regularly decided the ultimate fate of multinational corporations with a single stroke of his pen. He was an absolute phantom to most, famously avoiding trivial social gatherings and media events, making his sudden, unannounced appearance at a modest family anniversary party practically earth-shattering to these desperate social climbers. Chloe took a sudden, jerky step backward, her high heels scraping awkwardly against the stone. She looked exactly as though the polished floor beneath her had suddenly dissolved into a bottomless, lightless abyss, and she was already falling. Her breathing became incredibly shallow, her chest heaving in short, erratic bursts as she stared at the man walking into the room beside her. Julian recoiled slightly from the shattered glass, blinking rapidly in profound confusion. He turned to look at his wife, his brows furrowing deeply into a tight knot. He reached out to gently touch her arm, whispering a question to her, but she flinched violently away from his hand, as if his touch burned her. Julian stared at her, completely bewildered. In the 4 years they had been together, he had only ever known Chloe as an unflappable, fiercely arrogant woman who expertly controlled every narrative and every room she walked into. He had never once witnessed her completely lose her grip on reality, standing paralyzed and shaking like a small animal caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming freight train. Harrison ignored the fractured commotion entirely. The guests, driven by equal parts deep intimidation and desperate, clawing ambition, scrambled quickly out of his way, parting the dense crowd right down the middle to create a clear path. Several prominent local business owners and politicians eagerly attempted to step forward, wearing painfully bright, sycophantic smiles, hoping against hope to catch his eye for even a fraction of a second to secure a future introduction. Harrison did not offer a single one of them the dignity of a glance. His expression remained incredibly stoic, forming a wall of impenetrable ice, completely indifferent to the pathetic attempts to curry his favor. He walked with a slow, measured, and deliberate pace. His dark gaze cut straight through the sea of expensive designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, remaining locked entirely and exclusively on me. As he finally closed the distance between us, the cold, razor-sharp intensity in his eyes instantly melted away, rapidly replaced by a profound, unmistakable tenderness that he reserved exclusively for his wife. He stopped right beside me, completely ignoring the horrified, trembling form of my sister, who was standing merely 3 feet away, without uttering a single word. He reached out his arm. His large, warm hand settled firmly against the small of my back before he smoothly pulled me closer, wrapping his arm possessively and protectively around my waist. The physical contact instantly grounded me, sending a highly familiar surge of calm and reassurance rushing through my veins. "I apologize for the slight delay," Harrison said softly, though his rich, deep baritone voice carried effortlessly across the dead-silent room for everyone to hear. The traffic coming into the city from the airport took about 45 minutes longer than I anticipated. Hearing his voice so close, and seeing his arms secured tightly around my waist, Chloe let out a weak, high-pitched, strangled gasp that sounded exactly like all the oxygen had been violently punched out of her lungs. Her knees visibly buckled beneath her shimmering gold dress, and she had to desperately reach out with both hands to grab the edge of a nearby cocktail table simply to keep her body from collapsing entirely onto the floor. The absolute, suffocating horror radiating from her was palpable. In that singular defining moment, as she stared at my husband, she realized with devastating, soul-crushing clarity that the flawless, untouchable empire she had built on a foundation of lies was about to be ripped entirely to shreds. Exactly 24 months prior to this very evening, the foundation of my entirely new reality had been laid in the sterile, high-security boardroom of a skyscraper in Manhattan. At that time, a highly orchestrated smear campaign and a massive corporate espionage scandal had severely threatened to completely eradicate 30% of the market capitalization of Harrison's primary tech division. The board of directors was in full panic mode. My firm, Aegis Vanguard Solutions, was quietly brought in on an emergency contract to stop the bleeding. They dispatched me as the lead strategist. When I first walked into his office, Harrison was famously known for tearing executives apart, a man whose sheer intensity caused grown men to tremble. I did not flinch. I stood right across from his desk, looked him dead in the eye, and ruthlessly dismantled his compromised internal protocols, outlining a flawless, aggressive counteroffensive strategy that would salvage his empire within 90 days. Throughout those grueling 3 months of working side by side late into the night, the professional boundaries slowly dissolved, giving way to a profound, unspoken mutual respect. Harrison was entirely captivated not by my appearance, but by my intellect, my unyielding resilience, and my complete refusal to cower under his domineering presence. Where others saw a terrifying corporate titan, I saw a brilliantly analytical mind carrying the heavy, solitary burden of leading a global empire. We found a rare, quiet sanctuary within each other. Our connection grew impossibly deep, rooted in a shared understanding of enduring immense pressure and surviving in highly toxic environments. When he proposed, there was no grand public spectacle. We were married in a remarkably quiet, deeply private ceremony on a secluded coastline, surrounded by exactly 6 of our most trusted, fiercely loyal friends. There were no cameras, no press releases, and absolutely 0 members of my biological family. I had made the conscious, deliberate decision to keep my marriage completely hidden from my parents and relatives. I knew exactly who they were. To my family, human relationships were nothing more than calculated financial transactions and leverage for social climbing. If they had discovered that I was legally bound to a man whose personal net worth was easily measured in the tens of billions of dollars, they would have descended upon him like a swarm of ravenous locusts. They would have relentlessly exploited his name, begged for endless favors, and used his monumental success to fund their pathetic vanity projects. More importantly, I harbored a very specific, highly sensitive piece of information regarding my sister. Exactly 18 months ago, Chloe had aggressively pitched her supposedly groundbreaking fashion brand to Harrison's venture capital firm, desperately seeking an initial seed funding injection of roughly $3 million. I knew for an absolute fact that Harrison had personally reviewed her file and outright rejected her proposal. The sudden, sharp intake of breath from my mother snapped my focus violently back to the present reality of the ballroom. Harrison stood tall beside me, his presence radiating an undeniable warmth toward me, yet projecting an impenetrable wall of authority to the rest of the room. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear, a deeply intimate gesture that caused another massive wave of shocked murmurs to ripple through the wealthy crowd. Then, he slowly turned his intense, dark gaze toward my parents, who were currently frozen like statues in their expensive evening wear. "Good evening," Harrison said, his tone perfectly measured and carrying a chillingly polite resonance. "It is a distinct pleasure to finally make your acquaintance on the evening of your 40th wedding anniversary. I am Harrison. I am Faith's husband." My parents stared at him, their brains clearly short-circuiting as they desperately tried to reconcile the image of their supposedly pathetic, impoverished daughter with the billionaire titan standing protectively at her side. My father recovered first. The dismissive, disappointed scowl he had worn all evening vanished instantly, replaced by a sickeningly bright, eager grin that stretched uncomfortably across his face. He aggressively thrust his hand forward to shake Harrison's hand. My mother immediately followed suit, her voice practically dripping with artificial honey as she began to eagerly praise him, entirely forgetting the fact that mere minutes ago she had allowed Chloe to publicly humiliate me. "Oh, Harrison, "It is such an incredible honor," my mother gushed, her eyes darting greedily over the immaculate cut of his suit. We had absolutely no idea our faith had managed to find such an extraordinary man. "You simply must come to the house for a private dinner so we can properly welcome you into the family." Harrison accepted my father's handshake with barely a fraction of an inch of movement, his grip brief and entirely devoid of warmth. He looked down at my mother, his facial expression remaining as hard and unyielding as a slab of granite. "Thank you for the invitation," Harrison replied smoothly, his voice completely devoid of any genuine emotion, entirely dismissive of their sudden, desperate fawning. "However, my schedule is notoriously unforgiving. I am only here tonight to ensure my wife is treated with the exact level of respect she inherently deserves." Julian had always been a man fundamentally driven by his desperate proximity to power. Seeing my husband, the absolute apex predator of the global financial food chain, standing right in front of him was simply too much of a temptation for his fragile ego to resist. Julian completely ignored the catastrophic, physically crumbling state of his wife standing next to him. He absent-mindedly adjusted the collar of his tailored tuxedo, plastered on a confident, heavily practiced charismatic smile, and took 2 deliberate steps forward into our immediate space. He extended his right hand toward Harrison. Julian clearly wanted to establish a direct connection, to loudly prove to every single wealthy guest in the room that he belonged in the exact same elite orbit as the billionaire venture capitalist. "Mr. Vance," Julian began, his voice projecting a forced, overly enthusiastic familiarity that immediately grated on my nerves. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. My name is Julian. I believe you and my wife, Chloe, actually crossed paths quite recently. She mentioned having a highly productive and insightful business discussion with you regarding the expansion of her new luxury fashion label." Before Julian could even finish articulating his sentence, Chloe abruptly lunged forward. The sheer, unadulterated panic in her erratic movements was entirely foreign to her usual composed, arrogant elegance. She grabbed Julian tightly by the bicep, her manicured fingers digging so viciously into the expensive dark fabric of his suit jacket that I could clearly see the material pulling taut across his arm. Her face was a horrific mask of sheer desperation. Her eyes were wide, wild, and bloodshot as she stared pleadingly at Harrison. "Julian, please, you need to stop talking right now," she snapped, her voice trembling violently despite her desperate, pathetic attempt to sound casual and dismissive. She forced a highly unnatural, high-pitched, breathy laugh that echoed terribly in the suffocatingly tense silence of the grand ballroom. It was absolutely nothing important at all, just a brief, incredibly standard networking encounter, a simple, passing social greeting at a highly crowded corporate charity event. "Mr. Vance meets thousands of ambitious entrepreneurs and startup founders every single week. I am entirely certain he does not even remember a fleeting 5-minute conversation from ages ago. There is truly no need to bother him with such trivial, boring matters tonight of all nights." Harrison did not take Julian's extended hand. He simply looked down at the offered palm for a brief, freezing second before shifting his dark, imposing gaze directly onto Chloe. The ambient temperature in our immediate area seemed to plummet violently. He tilted his head slightly to the side, a calculated micro-expression that conveyed absolute, terrifying control. "I possess a flawless photographic memory, Chloe," Harrison stated flatly. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the absolute attention of every single guest who was currently leaning in to eagerly eavesdrop on the unfolding disaster. "I remember every single interaction, every submitted business proposal, and every individual who has ever managed to walk past the security detail of my executive offices. And I can assure you, Julian, the encounters your wife and I had were absolutely not fleeting, nor were they standard business discussions. In fact, they quickly evolved into a rather persistent series of highly specific, entirely inappropriate demands that completely disregarded basic professional etiquette and aggressively crossed several severe ethical boundaries." The warm, rosy color began to rapidly drain from Julian's face. The charming, networking smile completely vanished, instantly replaced by a dark, stormy wave of profound confusion. He slowly turned his head to look down at the woman who was still desperately clutching his arm. The gears in his mind were visibly grinding as he furiously calculated timelines, past events, and previously unquestioned excuses. A persistent series of demands, Julian echoed, his voice dropping an entire octave as a heavy, undeniable dose of toxic suspicion flooded his tone. He violently yanked his arm free from Chloe's desperate grip, physically distancing himself from her. "Chloe, what exactly is he talking about? You explicitly told me you only met his investment team once. You swore to me that the initial pitch was politely rejected via a standard automated email. Is this what you were actually doing during those 5 separate, week-long business trips to New York late last year? The exact same trips where you explicitly ordered me to stay home because you claimed your schedule was entirely too packed with late-night investor dinners and private mentorship sessions? Cornered, hyperventilating, and rapidly running out of oxygen, Chloe resorted to her oldest, most reliable, and deeply ingrained defense mechanism. She aggressively flipped the narrative to play the ultimate, persecuted victim. Thick tears suddenly welled up in her eyes, spilling over her heavy mascara as she pointed a violently shaking manicured finger directly at me. "Do not listen to a single word he says! Julian!" she shrieked loudly, her voice cracking with manufactured, theatrical hysteria. "Can you not see what is actually happening right in front of your eyes? Faith orchestrated this entire nightmare. She has always been bitterly, insanely jealous of my success and our happiness. She has been holding on to this toxic, pathetic grudge for 4 long years. She purposely brought this powerful man here tonight to sabotage our parents' anniversary and to publicly humiliate me in front of our entire extended family. She put him up to this sick game. He is completely lying just to ruin my spotless reputation." The air in the room grew suffocatingly dense, thick with the weight of her audacious lies. Harrison's jaw visibly clenched, a dangerous, razor-sharp edge appearing in his usually stoic expression. He stepped slightly in front of me, forming a solid, immovable protective shield against her venomous accusations. "Do not dare to project your profound moral bankruptcy onto my wife," Harrison commanded, his voice slicing brutally through her hysterical sobbing like a finely sharpened executioner's blade. "I am standing in this room tonight for one reason, and one reason only, to support and protect the woman I deeply love. I have absolutely zero interest in participating in a pathetic, dramatic theatrical charade orchestrated by someone fundamentally devoid of basic human decency. You created this catastrophic disaster entirely on your own. Chloe, do not insult my intelligence or the intelligence of your clearly oblivious husband by pretending you are a victim of anything other than your own repulsive, insatiable greed." The grand ballroom, previously a sanctuary of classical music and polite, hushed conversations, had transformed into a sterile, unforgiving courtroom. The silence was absolute, heavy with the collective anticipation of over 200 guests hanging on to every single syllable. Harrison did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His tone was surgical, slicing through the tension with lethal precision as he prepared to deliver the final, devastating blow to the crumbling facade my sister had spent her entire adult life meticulously constructing. "Since you are so deeply committed to playing the victim," Harrison began, his dark eyes locking onto Chloe with a chilling absence of mercy, "let us provide your husband and your adoring audience with the exact, unvarnished truth regarding your rejected proposal. I did not decline to inject $3 million into your fashion label because your designs lacked market viability or because your projected profit margins were unconvincing. Those were secondary failures. I explicitly ordered my legal department to immediately sever all contact with you because your entire business model was a massive, brazenly orchestrated fraud." A sharp collective gasp echoed through the room. My father took a step forward, his mouth opening to intervene, but a single, icy glare from Harrison froze him instantly in his tracks. When my forensic accounting team audited the financial portfolios you submitted, Harrison continued, his voice projecting effortlessly, they discovered within 48 hours that you had completely fabricated over 80% of your previous year revenue. You created dozens of fake wholesale invoices, established multiple phantom shell companies to artificially inflate your sales volume, and deliberately forged the digital signatures of two prominent retail distributors. You were not seeking an angel investment to grow a legitimate business. You were desperately attempting to secure a massive corporate bailout to cover up a catastrophic mountain of hidden debt and avoid federal indictment for wire fraud. Chloe was shaking so violently that the sequins on her gold dress blurred under the chandelier light. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped her throat. She looked wildly at the crowd, searching for a single sympathetic face, but found only cold, judgmental stares. However, the financial crimes were only the beginning of your profound desperation, Harrison stated, his tone dropping into a register of pure, unadulterated disgust. When you received the official rejection notice from my firm, you did not accept failure with grace. Instead, you acquired my highly classified private contact number through illicit channels. Over the course of 3 weeks, you subjected my personal device to a relentless barrage of increasingly explicit, highly suggestive messages. You offered to completely bypass the standard equity negotiations and suggested we could arrange a mutually beneficial private arrangement. You made it abundantly clear, in writing and through dozens of unsolicited photographs, that you were entirely willing to trade your body and prostitute yourself in exchange for that $3 million check. The entire ballroom seemed to collectively stop breathing. The sheer audacity, the absolute filth of the revelation, was too immense to process instantly. Beside her, Julian looked as though he had been physically struck by a high-speed vehicle. His eyes were wide, unblinking, locked onto the floor as the horrific reality of the timeline violently crashed into his consciousness. "New York," Julian whispered, his voice trembling so severely he could barely form the words. He slowly raised his head, his face contorted into a mask of pure agony and disgust as he stared at the woman he had married. "October of last year. You were in Manhattan for a week. That was the exact same week of our second wedding anniversary. I remember it perfectly. I stayed home, taking care of the house, while you posted those massive, gushing declarations of your undying love for me on every single social media platform. You wrote thousands of words about how I was your soulmate, how deeply committed we were, and how much you missed your perfect husband. And at that exact same moment, while soaking up the praise and admiration of thousands of followers online, you were actively trying to crawl into another man's bed to fund your bankrupt vanity project." "No!" Chloe suddenly shrieked, the sound tearing violently from her throat like a wounded animal. Her meticulously styled hair was now a tangled mess around her face, and thick, black streaks of mascara ran freely down her pale cheeks. She lunged toward Julian, desperately clawing at his jacket again. "He is lying! Julian, you have to believe me! He fabricated everything just to ruin me! I never did that! I would never do that to you!" Harrison simply sighed, a brief, exhausted sound of a man tired of dealing with a particularly stubborn, delusional child. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke suit jacket, adjusted his cuff, and looked directly at her with eyes as cold as a frozen ocean. "The Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Manhattan," Harrison recited smoothly, his voice devoid of any hesitation. "October 12th, exactly 11:45 in the evening. You bypassed the lobby concierge and took the private elevator directly to the penthouse floor. You knocked on the door of suite number 4200. You were wearing a tan trench coat and absolutely nothing underneath it. You stood in the hallway for exactly 12 minutes begging my personal security detail to let you inside until I explicitly threatened to have the local authorities arrest you for trespassing and harassment. I have the entire incident permanently archived on the hotel security footage, fully secured by my legal team. That single, terrifyingly precise statement was the final, devastating blow. The last remaining fragments of Chloe's fake mask. her towering arrogance, and her carefully curated image of a flawless, elite socialite completely and utterly disintegrated into dust. There was no more room for denial. The mathematical precision of Harrison's memory left absolutely zero margin for doubt. The guests in the grand hall, the very same people who had practically worshipped the ground she walked on just 30 minutes prior, immediately turned on her. The hushed whispers violently morphed into loud, openly contemptuous conversations. I could hear aunts, uncles, and wealthy family friends exchanging expressions of pure disgust, viciously tearing apart the woman they had once held up as the absolute gold standard of success. They called her a fraud, a cheap opportunist, and an absolute disgrace to the family name. The social execution was swift, brutal, and thoroughly absolute. Julian did not say another word to her. He did not yell. He did not curse. And he did not demand any further explanations. The profound betrayal had completely hollowed him out. He simply looked down at his left hand. With slow, deliberate, and chillingly calm movements, he pinched the thick gold wedding band resting on his ring finger. He pulled it off. He held it for a brief, heavy second before casually tossing it onto the nearest cocktail table. The heavy gold ring landed with a sharp, definitive clinking sound, bouncing once before settling perfectly still against the polished glass surface, without sparing a single backward glance. Julian turned his back on the woman he had stolen from me 4 years ago. He squared his shoulders and walked with long, determined strides straight through the crowd. Heading directly for the grand exit doors, Chloe watched him leave, her eyes wide with uncomprehending terror. She let out a guttural, wretched sob, her legs finally giving out completely. She collapsed heavily onto the marble floor, her expensive gold-sequined gown pooling around her like a puddle of dirty water, left entirely alone amidst a sea of judging, unforgiving eyes. The grand ballroom was now completely engulfed in absolute chaos. The meticulously planned 40th anniversary celebration had fractured into a spectacle of shouting matches and horrified gossip. As the reality of the social catastrophe truly settled in, my parents finally snapped out of their shock. They scrambled through the bewildered, whispering crowd, their faces flushed with a toxic mixture of profound embarrassment and desperate calculation. They practically threw themselves into our path, ignoring my sister who was still sobbing hysterically on the marble floor. "Faith, Harrison, please wait just 1 minute," my father pleaded, his hands reaching out but hovering nervously in the empty air, entirely too intimidated to actually touch my husband. "You cannot simply leave right now. We absolutely must control this narrative. The press and the local social circles will have an absolute field day with this disaster. We need to present a united front, to show everyone that our family remains strong and connected. Come to the private study with us. We can draft a joint public statement." My mother aggressively nodded in agreement, forcing a pathetic, trembling smile. "Yes, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet desperation that made my stomach turn. "You are still part of this family. You have a duty to help us manage this crisis. We can fix Chloe's mess if Harrison just makes a few phone calls to his high-level media contacts. He can silence the rumors before tomorrow morning." I looked at the two people who had raised me, the parents who had so effortlessly cast me aside 4 years ago, blaming me for my own heartbreak while constantly elevating the daughter who had betrayed me. I felt no anger toward them anymore. The burning resentment that had fueled my silent departure had entirely burned itself out. "I have absolutely no duty remaining to this family," I stated, my voice completely steady and remarkably calm, cutting cleanly through their frantic babbling. "I fulfilled my final obligation as a daughter by simply showing up tonight. I brought my husband to pay my respects to your marriage, but I will not spend a single second of my future cleaning up the catastrophic messes created by a daughter you blindly enabled. It is time for me to live my own life, completely separate from this toxic charade." I shifted my gaze down to the polished floor, where Chloe remained crumpled in a ruined heap of glittering gold fabric and smeared makeup. A few hours ago, I might have expected this exact moment to feel incredibly triumphant, I truly thought watching the architect of my deepest misery lose absolutely everything would bring a massive, overwhelming wave of vindication. But as I watched her cry, screaming for a husband who was already miles away, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no joy, no pity, and no sadistic satisfaction. There was only a quiet, profound emptiness. In that singular, defining moment, I finally understood the true essence of revenge. True vengeance did not live in the spectacular, public destruction of my enemies. It did not matter that her empire of lies had burned to ashes in front of hundreds of people. Real revenge was the absolute apathy I felt right now. It was the beautiful, liberating realization that the deep, agonizing wounds she had inflicted upon me 4 years ago no longer held a single ounce of power over my soul. Harrison did not say another word to my parents. He simply reached down and gently enveloped my hand in his. His grip was warm, solid, and incredibly grounding. Together, we turned our backs on the screaming, the crying, and the suffocating hypocrisy of a bloodline that had never once recognized my worth. We walked through the grand oak doors side by side, leaving the suffocating mansion and stepping out into the cool, crisp evening air. We got into his waiting luxury car, the heavy doors shutting out the noise of my past forever. As the driver smoothly steered the vehicle away from the sprawling estate, navigating down the dark, tree-lined avenues of the city, I leaned my head against Harrison's broad shoulder. I looked out the tinted window at the vast, endless expanse of the night sky scattered with brilliant stars. A deep, genuine smile spread across my face. I closed my eyes, breathing in the comforting scent of his cologne, feeling a profound, absolute serenity wash over my entire being. I had survived the wreckage, executed a flawless escape, and finally found my true, lasting freedom. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.